Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by AWS and Sage. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning, where we have an exciting presentation ahead. Before we get that ball rolling, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review with you. First off, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch at a later point in time, or of course, share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options to do so. The first option is the chat tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. So if you see that chat tab, I would like you to go ahead and test that out for us by letting us know from where in the world you are joining us. Now, if you have any specific questions, we do want you to send your questions to that Q&A tab. The Q&A tab is on the right side of the chat, and sending your questions there just helps us keep track, and we do want to respond to as many questions as we can today, so feel free to send those in as soon as you have them. If you jump over to that handouts tab, you'll see there are a couple of additional resources there for you, mainly our pulse meter report that we'll be reviewing today, as well as a copy of the slides that we'll be going through. And additionally, before we close things out today, we are going to be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around to make sure you're one of our lucky winners. All right, so our topic is modernizing mission critical systems. And I'm joined today by Tom Ellis, Solution Architect Manager at AWS, Chris Carter, Senior Director of Enablement at Sage, and leading this conversation is Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer of Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Tom, Chris, thank you both so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Mike, do you want to take the reins from here?
I will. Thank you, Cody, and thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We're going to talk about modernizing mission-critical systems, and it really goes along with a lot of the research we've been doing over the past couple of months with our partners at AWS and many of their partners. So is a partner of a partner also a partner? I don't know. We can talk about the transitive property of partnership as we move forward. But we're joined by our pals at AWS and Sage today to really kind of dig in. One, we'll go through the pulse meter data, which we have done a survey of you folks, right, our audience, to get a sense of how they feel about modernizing a number of their applications. But really, before we dive into that, and then I'll have Tom and Chris introduce themselves a little bit. This is a pretty critical topic, right? I mean, we're not talking about, kind of these systems that, I have it to run, I don't know, your vacation system or whatever it is, right? There are a whole bunch of different systems that I would term as, nobody's getting hurt, nobody's getting fired if these things drop. Or if these things are out of commission. You start talking about mission critical applications. We'll specifically dive into finance and accounting, but there are a variety of them, right? HR, manufacturing, shipping, warehousing. I mean, sales, right? A variety of them where if these things go down, they are going, you're pretty much out of business. So we're really going to kind of focus in with F&A or finance and accounting as kind of the metaphor, but we really want to extend this and discuss this within the context of, many mission critical systems, because there's a whole bunch of initiatives under that whole modernization umbrella of organizations looking into replatforming. And, we've got two experts here in terms of helping folks get there, making sure that they've got the right from a security, resilience, operational aspect, making sure that they've got really the right perspectives and capabilities in place to support those environments. So, gentlemen, welcome. Tom, why don't you go first? Tell us who you are, what you do most days, and then we'll get moving.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and great to be here. Thanks for inviting us on. My name's Tom Ellis. I'm a solution architect manager at AWS. I'm based in London, and I look after a team of solution architects that we work with our customers on helping build out their software on AWS, so particularly with our software companies, what they can build, how they can architect it, and understand really the best practices of deploying software into AWS.
Perfect. Chris Carter, how are you? I know. Listen, I mean, we all owe Chris a debt of gratitude. He's actually on vacation or holiday, for Tom. If he's on holiday this week, and he's coming in from from a tropical place. Well, I guess everywhere in the world's kind of tropical now, but
Right.
So Chris, welcome and thank you
Yeah.
for being in here on your holiday.
Absolutely happy to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me. So my name is Chris Carter. I'm a Senior Director of Partner Enablement at Sage. And so I help work with our reseller partners on learning how to market, sell, and deliver our solutions. As Mike indicated, we have a lot of F&A, finance and accounting based solutions, but our portfolio is expanding. And so we've got a lot of different mission critical apps that we help our customers bring online and bring to the table. It's a bit of a background. I've spent about half my career in industry, and so I have had many different IT leadership roles, including a couple of CIO roles for different organizations. And so I've got a lot of professional empathy for our buyers out there that live and breathe in the IT world. And then I've made the transition to working for a software publisher right now, and really helping kind of deploy our mission critical systems out for our partners and customers. So thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, no, welcome guys, and really appreciate your participation as well. And it's kind of like an interesting backdrop, and we'll get into the numbers in a second. But Chris, you kind of brought up a pretty interesting point, and that's when you're a CIO, right? When you have responsibility, especially the smaller the company, the more responsibility you end up having from that perspective. The idea of managing things on your own prem, right? Kind of having to be responsible for those systems. Man, that just created a lot of heartburn. Right. So this whole move towards software as a service has really been a boon operationally for a lot of folks. But Tom, to your point, these companies that are moving, kind of systems, and I know at Sage, you guys did an acquisition to get your your SaaS environment. But and again, I mean, you just have a bunch of different considerations in terms of delivering a lot of these mission critical systems in a SaaS type environment, and the buyers out there, right, the folks that actually are consuming these systems have to start to understand a little bit about, okay, what does the architecture look like? How are you dealing with resilience? What services are you using? If it's platformed on a cloud provider like AWS, again, what are we doing to make sure that our data is both isolated and replicated so that we're not going to have any kind of outages or data loss or anything like that? So Chris, is you're kind of working with a lot of customers, are they asking these kind of questions? Are they just assume, hey,
no, absolutely asking. Yeah,
do this.
Yeah, right, and it's still it's a primary concern. Certainly, still, I think the customers that have really fully embraced cloud providers like AWS, which we have as well, internally for Sage. But it's understanding that the level of sophistication and technology and skills required to keep an environment like that, running, at top performance and top, levels of security and resiliency, is not something that is for the faint of heart, and certainly not something that you really these days can take on your own. You need to leverage somebody that's got the chops like AWS has brought the billions of dollars of R&D to their infrastructure. And we rely heavily on that. And yeah, it is an absolute primary concern, I think, for the people that are paying attention, Mike.
Yeah, great. So Tom, when you're working with a lot of these, kind of companies, they're moving, a lot of maybe their traditional on-prem stuff, into the cloud, especially if they're a software provider. I mean, how much time do you spend, working with them to make sure they've got, kind of the right architecture in place, the resilience, again, leveraging, a lot of the backup and, kind of the alternate, kind of networking capabilities to make sure that you're building a highly available type of environment?
Yeah, I'd say like majority of the conversation as a solution architect working with our customers is doing that, right? So having those conversations about how they can architect their software as a service platform to be highly available, and also secure. Of course, security is a key concern, and AWS is architected to be like the most secure cloud computing environment available today, and it's trusted by many global organizations, banks, military, high sensitivity organizations. So it's really working with those software providers to help them architect and get the best out of that for their software. And as Chris was saying, leveraging the power of some of the scale that we've achieved through, for example, in the security space, our security standards, compliance certifications, or some of the regional capabilities that we have across the 31 different geographic regions we run in around the world, to be able to serve their customers as well.
Interesting. Well, good. So let's dive into the data, fellas. Let's see what we have here. So our first question that we asked as part of our survey, where is your finance and accounting system platformed? Looks like 32% said on-prem, 16% in AWS, 13% in Azure, 22% in another cloud provider, and 17% already are using a SaaS environment. So again, Christy, do you have folks that are taking maybe the traditional Sage platform and moving it to AWS and doing that? Or do most folks use the SaaS offering that you guys offer?
It's a mix, Mike. I mean, some of our older platforms that we have that are on-prem architected platforms, they are definitely leveraging AWS and other services like that to at least move the underlying infrastructure out to the cloud to a more resilient platform, even if you're using older technology on top of it. For our new deployments, for all of our kind of modern cloud-based technology, we started a journey, kind of like everybody else has, and over the last 15 years, we've been a SaaS provider for over 20 years, and we rolled our own hardware for the first part of that journey, and really had our own data centers and infrastructure, but just like everybody else that's paying attention in this world, realized that when providers like AWS came along, and had dedicated professionals that were paying attention to minute little details that we would have maybe a system administrator that would be 0.1% of his job to maintain this architecture for us, and it became readily apparent to us that we were in the best position to create great world-class software. We're not an infrastructure company, and we want to defer to somebody that is. And it's where we partnered with AWS, and so all of our new deployments for customers are going out deployed on AWS as the underlying infrastructure, and we just have to worry about the software itself, which is a beautiful place to be.
Right. So when the customer contracts with Sage, are you guys are delivering now? Is it you're partnered with AWS? No, I know you kind of platform in AWS, but it's procured through Sage, so they're working with you guys, and
it's rolled into our service, and so they don't actually pay separately. They just pay us for our service, and as part of that is that our partnership with AWS underlying that. So they provide all of the awesome AWS infrastructure that you get just part and parcel, but using the platform, and then we provide the software on top of it, and then we have a relationship with AWS on the back end where we settle up.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, everybody's got to get paid.
Everybody's got to get paid. We lost Mike for a second.
I think so.
At the end of the day, somehow, and
Give it a second here to catch up. Sounds like he's
Yeah, I think here he goes.
Okay.
And back on in a second, I'm sure.
Sure.
percent, and 11% is we plan to migrate to a SaaS provider. So what about that data? Tom, you're dealing with, again, architects all the time. You're kind of at the front end working with customers, and we can talk about F&A, but really we can expand that to more mission critical systems. Sure. So does that kind of roughly make sense? You have some folks that just don't have workloads. They just don't want to move. And then, kind of variety of the mixture is anywhere from the next 6 months to 2 years.
We lost you for a little bit there, Mike, but I think it caught up with us, so we're okay. I think, it's really interesting data that came out of this. So I think a lot of organizations could be in the place of, they're planning, but they haven't got an immediate plan. I think what's interesting to me here is actually the 24% within 6 months, right? That it shows that there is some active projects going on about migrating their finance and accounting system to the cloud, of which be interested to see which participants really took that into mind around the SaaS part, because one of the things I find interesting about this is that people who are adopting the SaaS approach don't necessarily even mind where it is. They're trusting. They're putting their trust into the finance and accounting organization that runs that SaaS product. As you say, if you do it with Sage today, it was going to be hosted on AWS. However, they are really of the mindset that they trust their accounting software provider, and they don't need to go further. And perhaps these other ones that are doing migration a bit later, it's just a backbone of a project, and maybe it's something that everyone's getting around to. Everyone's busy with different projects and migrations, and they're just taking baby steps towards getting those across.
Yeah. If I might, Tom, I chime in here for a second as well. I think it's interesting to me the 31% that has no plans to migrate to the cloud. I think in 2023 that's a little shocking to me, because when I kind of go back and channel my old CIO days and think about the journey that I was making when I was going through that process, the conclusion I came to relatively quickly was that I'm never going to have the amount of resources that I need to really devote to, especially security, but redundancy as well. And understanding that an organization like AWS is going to spend, several orders of magnitude more time, attention, and money than I will ever have as an individual organization to do all of the things that I need to do to make sure that my data is secure. And, when many moons ago, I can remember having, the CFO that I worked with, and he really did want to feel the heat off of the server where his data resided. He wanted to be able to go put his hand on it. And at that time, I was even at that time trying to convince him of, yeah, that's great, but, we can't secure it at a level that, somebody that does this, full time does. And so, when I see the folks that have no plans to migrate to the cloud, I'm hoping that, they've either got some really amazing, infrastructure, or they just unplugged that server from the internet completely.
So what's another advantage to, kind of trying to replatform and look at a lot of these very critical workloads and migrating them to the cloud is, kind of the scalability aspect of things too, right? And you have all sorts of organizations, and obviously mergers and acquisitions happen almost every day of companies of all sizes, right? So, you may do something strategic, you end up with double the size of your company, or maybe you have to get rid of half the company. And when you build out all this infrastructure, again, whether you're using a SaaS platform or you're taking traditional software and platforming it up in the cloud, you're able to really expand your environment, much more gracefully, contract it when you need to, and really pay for what you use, right? So as opposed to having, Chris, I know, back in data center land, right? You had your little stair step. It's like, okay, I got a bunch of stuff. Oh no, I need more stuff, so you put in a big order, now you get more stuff, and you have all that opportunity cost in terms of hardware resources that are just unused. Well, the cloud addresses that, again, whether you're using, SaaS or, some other mechanism of running software in the cloud, just gives you much more control over your costs. And again, for folks that are interested in finance and accounting systems, you'd think they'd be a little bit sensitive to costs.
You'd think. Yeah, you'd think for sure.
You'd think. So you brought up, kind of that point, Chris, and I think that really is a great segue into the next question, which is really about data security and privacy, especially for finance and accounting, right? The data doesn't get more important to an organization, than the books. Right. Kind of what's happening, how much you have, what are you selling, how much are you spending, all of that stuff. So obviously very, very sensitive data. So we kind of asked the community, and again, how confident are you in that data security? And, we got interesting, between extremely confident and very confident, you have 44% and another 26% are moderately confident. Only 16% or 14% are slightly confident or not confident. And I have to, come clean with everybody. I'm actually out in Vegas at the Black Hat conference. So that's a worldwide security conference where a lot of cutting edge research into information security is presented. And that those answers, kind of really relate to me, that folks don't exactly understand what the threats are to their environment, to be extremely confident. I mean, unless you don't have anybody accessing the data, then then sure, you can be confident. But once you start opening it up to folks, you really do need to start thinking about, kind of how am I going to, kind of implement security? How am I going to make sure that nobody else has access to my data? Am I using stronger authentication? What kind of encryption do I have in place? So Chris, what do you guys do when customers ask, how do I make sure that, kind of my data is my data and nobody else is getting to my data?
Sure. I mean, it certainly starts with, talking about the infrastructure and the platform, and that it'll immediately leads us back to our conversation about AWS, because, we can really kind of, pull through everything that AWS does, from an architectural standpoint, from a security standpoint, from redundancy, resiliency standpoint, and just kind of say that comes with table stakes of us, partnering with AWS. And so then on top of that, then we talk about the application level security that we apply through, through our software and what we develop. But it all ties in back down to the, to the kind of that core, because the, underlying it, there is, and I know I've referenced this before, but, billions of dollars of research and development that goes into this platform. And we get it because we are just, partners with AWS. And then, on top of that, then we look at, how do we architect our systems to leverage their, leverage their foundation, and then also just, put in place best practices. And so, when we have customers ask about that for our systems, we talk about the architecture itself, we talk about how it's constructed, and then we just go back and point to, the history, the record that we've got of not having any significant breaches, not having any significant downtime, and then we kind of tie it all together. And the reason is all these things we talked to you about before. And so it really ultimately just becomes a story, and again, I can't help myself. I always go back to my old days of talking about it when I was a CIO, and I look at it and just go, there's no way I can't, as an organization that's got a mission that is something other than data security. If I'm selling widgets, or if I'm out providing some sort of services to the public, it's not my day job to care about those things, and I want it to be somebody's day job. And so that's why I work with, as Sage, we work with AWS. That's why somebody comes to us, Sage, trusting us that we are going to architect or something, and it is our day job to care about that.
Yeah, you bet. So Tom, let me put you on the spot a little bit now. Working with a lot of companies, especially software companies that are starting to, think about platforming in AWS. What are some of the capabilities and some of the services that the end customer, right? Somebody who is buying a SaaS service, how should they be asking that question to really understand whether the SaaS provider understands, security and resilience and a lot of those capabilities that should give them comfort that, yes, my data is safe because they're taking advantage of, the market leading capabilities of some platform like AWS?
Yeah, they should be asking their SaaS providers, what platform are they running on? Are they leveraging all the capabilities that platform provides? For example, in AWS, we have 117 services that can store customer data, and all of those offer the ability to encrypt the data. And Sage takes advantage of these, right? To then enable that encryption. So all of the data that the customer is providing into those platforms is inheriting that encryption. And then, of course, throughout the rest of the stack, whether it be through the application security, that Sage leverage our additional security services such as AWS Inspector, and our tool that helps customers platform their different applications through a well-architected environment. So like AWS Control Tower to configure their accounts where these applications reside, and all the different security controls that sit within that. And then from an availability perspective, I touched on it a little bit at the beginning about our 31 geographic regions, but in terms of like the underlying resilience within each of those regions, there are a number of availability zones where Sage and other customers host their applications and spread those applications for resilience, taking advantage of those and the regional model so that they could host the data and the applications closer to where those customers are is a really important ask that I think these consumers of these applications should be asking their SaaS providers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Tom. And really, I don't think it's either unrealistic or unexpected if you're dealing with these mission critical systems that we've been talking about so far today to actually dig in with your SaaS provider. I mean, a lot of times, you're doing a 15-day trial and, oh, I love the functionality, and you don't think about these things, right? But when you're going through due diligence, when you're trying to make sure you've got the right platform, it is okay. It is fair game for you to, really talk to the vendor, talk and understand about their architecture, make sure that you are comfortable with the platform that it is built on, but also the services that are there so that you can get that isolation, so that you can make sure that you've got things like logs so that you understand, who's making what changes. So you've got, auditability again and again. In finance, that's a big thing, right? Auditability is a pretty big thing. So you got to really focus on those kind of things. So what we also did is we cut the data to look at smaller companies, right? So we'll kind of just arbitrarily decide SMB is less than 1,000 employees. So we took a look at that data too, and it's pretty consistent. I mean, I think a little bit more kind of say that they're not comfortable or kind of slightly comfortable on that front, but the data is largely the same from that standpoint. So again, part of me is like, well, it must be okay to be like blissfully unaware of what's really happening out there. But also, I think that there are a number of things, especially for smaller companies, that they can do in order to make sure that, again, they've got the right, kind of authentication in place. They've ensured that they've built out, different, access groups within. And I'm not exactly sure how Sage's role-based access control works, but, making sure that folks don't have access to stuff that, they shouldn't on that front. So are there other tips that you guys would kind of give folks that are in a smaller company profile that they should be thinking about, relative to moving to a SaaS or picking a SaaS provider?
Tom, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'd say definitely leverage those controls. I guess as a smaller organization, maybe there's more trust placed in the SaaS provider versus in a larger organization where they want to get a bit more due diligence around what that provider is doing. But leverage like the RBAC controls that are available in there, whether they provide some sort of single sign-on using your own organizational single sign-on process. So then you can link that through to the finance and accounting application, and then handle all the usual things that happen in an organization, leavers and joiners and all those things. Link that through to your own company's database of people. So then that comes back, and then there's no additional access controls required. Like the previous traditional world where you'd have usernames and passwords for different people and they'd move on, and then all of a sudden someone else has got access to the data they shouldn't. Leverage the capabilities that provide there. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I absolutely will add on to that. I think that, where we are at in 2023 is remarkable to me, frankly, because, I started my technical career in the early 90s. And so watching the migration that we've made and the services that are available now to organizations of any size, it really doesn't matter what size you are anymore. It still requires, money, you still have to pay for the services, but the ability now to have something like an AWS, which is really truly subscription-based infrastructure, where you can go in and have all of the bells and whistles that you would get if you were a Fortune 5 company. But you have the ability to buy them essentially, buy the drink, if you will. Literally, 5-user shop can have the same level of enterprise grade tools in front of them that a 50,000 person company can have now. That didn't used to be the case 20 years ago. But now, to Tom's point, you can buy single sign-on, you can buy the entire infrastructure as a subscription, fully configured, and all you have to do is go in and just basically follow a wizard to configure it to the point where you need it for your organization. is just mind-blowing to me. If I spin back 15, 20 years, because you would have needed an infrastructure and a set of experts and probably a bunch of consultants to deploy the same thing that you can now deploy with several clicks. And we extend that out to our software as well. We're providing enterprise grade finance and accounting software now for any size organization, and it can be configured in a matter of days. And it's just through literally a series of clicks, clicks and radio buttons, as opposed to zero code. And you don't need to do anything other than answer a series of business questions ultimately to get you to where you need to be. And it's just a revolution. And so from that standpoint, small organizations, can absolutely avail themselves to all the full technology stack that used to be available only to the highest and most, financially available enterprises. And so, I think there's no excuse these days in 2023 for a smaller organization not to be, fully secure, fully robust, and available at a level that only enterprises, enterprise level could have expected 10, 15 years ago.
That's right. And I kind of got into the business maybe a little earlier than you, Chris, but not a lot. And that's what I mean when we were standing these things up. I mean, you had to buy a whole bunch of hardware. You had to, worry about configuration. You had to make sure that everything was up and running. And man, it was not pleasant. So, again, just for you kids today that are out there, we really did have to walk uphill both ways through the snow with no shoes to make sure we could, generate a P&L report.
Dragging a database server with us the whole way.
That's right. All right. So next, let's talk a little bit about F&A is really kind of part of an enterprise computing environment. You don't have to even be an enterprise to have an enterprise computing environment, but you have other systems, right? You have sales, you have manufacturing, you have a variety of other, kind of technology platforms that you use. So then if you're moving, to a SaaS platform, if you're moving your existing platform into the cloud, obviously integration becomes something that, you have to think about, right? How am I going to make sure that the data gets into the F&A system or comes out of the F&A system for some of these other key issues? So we talked to our audience, and it looks like connectors were 22%. That was a popular one, and standard API. So again, when you think about almost half, we're dealing with either connectors or standard APIs. So again, that's kind of this whole thing. And Chris, I'm sure you have an opinion about this, but again, this is kind of the way the market seems to be going, right?
100%.
Which is, what we want to do is make sure that we've got an open environment so that regardless of the systems that you have, the other systems can work together. Now, kind of you sit there and go, well, 24% are still doing custom code. And again, you both of you guys, I'm sure, have been here. The minute you kind of write code, you're in the software business, right? So you got to keep it up to date. Anytime the, kind of either side of the systems change, you're in that business. So again, that becomes a very difficult thing to, maintain over time. 16%, basically leave their F&A in a vacuum, right? They don't have any custom integrations, and 11% say their SaaS provider handles it, which usually means they're using a standard API, because SaaS provider is not going to do that. So Chris, I mean, when you're talking to customers, to what degree is this a major selection issue too, that you can play nice with all the other stuff they already have?
Yeah, no, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, I think the 16% that say they don't integrate means they just export a whole lot of stuff to Excel.
That's right.
Yeah, and even then it probably moves to another system because I mean, no system, these days works in a vacuum. And so, you really got, if you've got the 50-ish% that basically say connectors provided by our provider or standard APIs, that's where, that to your point, that's the future. That's ultimately all systems need to be interoperable, and the technology just continues to evolve to make these things easier. I mean, these days being able to just go into a platform that does mapping where you can just do field level mapping in a GUI and essentially build a custom connection that way, but again leveraging things like connectors and standard APIs, and then you're just going in and configuring it. And ultimately that's the way we're architected. We have a lot of vendors that we have a marketplace that they can come in that have custom connectors built already for our platform, leveraging and sitting on top of our standard APIs. And then to your point, we do have customers that have bespoke older systems that they want to connect with, and that's where the custom code comes in a lot of instances. Although even with those, what we do is we encourage them to find an integration partner that basically they can write some custom code into an integration platform that then allows them to leverage connectors and APIs on the other side of it. And so ultimately they're trying to, hiding a little bit of that, that older system under a modern access method. But yeah, ultimately, it's very important for our customers because essentially, they are trying to build out their digital ecosystem. Every customer they're either doing it deliberately with architects, like folks from Tom's team, or they're doing it accidentally by just buying systems and plugging them together. But they're still building out an ecosystem. Don't get you wrong. And so, and to do that, you have to be able to, have standard and reliable ways to access that data. And so, it's going to be, always important. I think, there are some vendors out there that, folks that we compete with that really do try to bring the suite. But even those systems have to be integrated with because they can't be all things to all people.
They can't. Well, they'll tell you they can, but in reality,
but they can't.
They can't. So Tom, and obviously, kind of AWS has a number of different, capabilities underlying the platform that, makes it both secure and reliable to do API stuff. You just want to tell our folks out here a little bit about those capabilities. Because again, what we're trying to do is educate everybody to know what questions to ask when you're talking to a provider. Are you using these services? Do you understand, again, how these things work and making sure that, they can be done in a secure and reliable fashion?
Yeah, and AWS has a number of offerings in this area. I think it's really interesting from the data actually to see which, again, like what are they looking for? Are they looking for an off-the-shelf connector? From when AWS was born, the whole premise was, API first, right? So even if you're just consuming AWS infrastructure and services, you can do so either via GUI or an API, right? It's all there, and there's a documentation behind all these API standards. Of course, as a consumer of a SaaS application, you may be interested in some of that. You may prefer your SaaS provider to do that for you. So I think we're really seeing like a pivot towards people who just want a point and click integration these days. But those standard APIs have to be there, right? You can't have that nice WYSIWYG wizard that helps you set up an integration without those standard interfaces being documented and exposed by both the cloud providers and the SaaS providers you're purchasing software from. And I think even like Sage, for example, with the connectors and developer.sage.com, the whole developer site with documentation, I think it's really is this a similar approach to we've been taking at AWS. And of course, we have services that help you build out APIs as well and help you build and secure them, like our AWS API Gateway service. So if you're able to attach applications and functions together and expose those directly, publicly facing, and build out the APIs that way. And of course, Sage and other organizations leverage that to then provide APIs to their end customers and perhaps like the partners they work with, both Sage partners and also their end customers as well.
You bet. And that's really one of the advantages of partnering up with a specific cloud provider is that you can optimize your environment based on the services that they provide, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Could the folks at Sage, do they have talented developers? Could they build out their own API gateway and, layer in some API security? I don't have any doubt that they could do that, but should they? Right. And that's where you want to ask the question. Are you focused on building out features and functions for me, since I'm paying you to do F&A and you're leveraging, again, the cloud platform in order to, do the other stuff. Right. So now let's kind of pivot a little bit into, again, one of those things that, again, Chris, when you were a practitioner, right, this was just the bane in your existence, right? Do system upgrades and maintenance activities for your finance and accounting systems cause monthly downtime, right? So again, dig into the data, minimal downtime, about 44%, some downtime, 26%, significant downtime, 9%, and our SaaS vendor handles upgrades 21%. So what is that data, kind of show you, Chris, again, back in the day when you were doing this? Is that
right? Yeah. Oh, nightmares. I mean, that was really, I dreaded upgrades, and the organization dreaded upgrades, and to the point where we would often put off critical upgrades because of the downtime required, because of the, taking the system down at 5 p.m. on Friday night, and crossing our fingers, and and hoping like heck that we were up by 8 a.m. Monday morning. And knowing then that I had my staff working all weekend, plus the accounting staff coming in on Sunday to do testing, just all of the, the nightmare scenarios you can think around that. And when it didn't go well, then, it was, it was incredibly stressful for, for the entire team and the organization itself. And, and so I like seeing that 21% that our SaaS vendor, handles our upgrades, because, that's where we're at in the Sage world now is, we do 4 releases a year, and on our intact platform, and the customer comes in on Monday morning with new functionality. System wasn't down at all, and so they just walk into a brand new set of sets of features that they can choose to adopt on their own schedule, and there's zero downtime associated with it, which is just phenomenal, and it's really it makes the the care and feeding of a finance and accounting system much less stressful for the IT organization and for the finance organization inside a company.
It does, and again, before I turn over to you, Tom, get a couple of your thoughts. And again, yes, that there's maintenance, right? There's upgrades and those kind of things. Remember, there's also the scale piece of it that I mentioned before, which is when I start running out of capacity, or kind of run out of disk or whatever it is like that, I got to take the system down. I got to migrate it to something else. I got to get some dude in there to do it. And again, the bigger the company you are, the harder it is to manage those things. So again, one of the advantages of SaaS is it's somebody else's problem. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm inherently somewhat lazy. I would much rather somebody else deal with it than me. Right.
You're efficient, Mike. You're not lazy. You're efficient.
Efficient. All right. I like that. I like that framing, Chris. You're hired as my personal marketing person on that. So Tom, and again, when you think about, kind of upgrades, maintenance, how do you start to counsel, kind of folks to leverage the capabilities of the cloud to really, make this a lot easier on them?
So in a way, like it is a layer below the SaaS provider, right? We encourage the SaaS providers to take advantage of services that provide these higher levels of uptime and availability, right? Ensuring that the way they architect it, taking care of like their databases in a managed service, for example, that is highly available during the upgrade process. So then the data is always accessible, regardless of what's happening at the back end. Is one way we talk about it. There's a whole pillar of our AWS well-architected framework to help our customers architect around this resilience, and is the pillar name. And that really just guides customers through the best practices of them. Part of it is adopting those managed services so the upgrades are seamless. Of course, in simple terms, something highly available that can fail over between certain compute things underneath, whether that be like a relational database system that has multiple servers online at the same time, multiple instances behind the scenes, and seamlessly fails over. So then as a consumer of the software, you're none the wiser to things being upgraded, right? I think I hark back to previous jobs where I used to have to switch the cable over at the right time in a data center on an upgrade, right? That's especially with infrastructure that's exposed via standard APIs and it is hugely scalable in AWS. You're no longer reliant on that one system that you have, and all of the practices that go around operating a cloud platform, where DevOps capabilities, infrastructure as code, and even the way that a software provider deploys. You may have heard of like a blue-green environment where you can flip over between the two live environments, and then the software being divided up into many different microservices behind the scenes really means to the end consumer, they're none the wiser if an upgrade has occurred. They just say, hey, there's a new feature that's been released. It's a great advantage of consuming SaaS.
It is. And I look forward to the day when we're all so spoiled by the fact that, most of our stuff is highly reliable and reasonably secure because the vendors, take care of it. But again, what we want everybody to be is educated from the standpoint of these are the things you need to ask about. Yes, many of these companies do a very good job of keeping this thing up and running, right? Making sure that your data is somewhat secure, but you've got to do your diligence on that front, because the last thing you want to do is just assume stuff happens and everything is great until it's not, right? Because these are mission critical systems, and that means we can't really screw around with, kind of making sure that kind of the right resilience things aren't in place. So let's kind of hit our last question. Oh my goodness, we're almost at the end here. How confident are you in your disaster recovery and business continuity plans for your F&A systems? And again, we cut the data from all respondents to and also within SMB. So similar data, right? So, extremely competent, 14%, very confident, 23, moderately, 28, 20% slightly, and 15% saying not confident. So a little bit, in terms of security, a little bit less from that standpoint. Similar numbers, again, on the data on the SMB side of things, which again is a little counterintuitive, right? If anything, there's a little bit less on the kind of not and slightly, whereas they're a little bit more confident in security, a little bit less in disaster recovery. Is that just because folks, you think about security, it's high profile, you're hearing about breaches and hacks all the time and ransomware and all that other, kind of scourge on society. And, you don't really hear about, outages or, this dude was down for 4 days and, couldn't ship any product because, their system went down. That tends not to be, publicized in the media or anything like that. Is that much of it? Or, Chris, are folks worried about availability and disaster recovery when, they're picking a platform?
They are. They definitely are. But I think your sense is a little bit right there. That security is always the high profile thing that people are aware of and see the breaches on the national news. Hear about that in a much larger context. Whereas talking about business continuity, it's I guess maybe not quite as sexy, although just as important. Certainly, I think two events really kind of shape business continuity for me in my mind. Living in Houston, Texas, we had Hurricane Harvey,
right.
back in 2018, and watching the entire city shut down was a pretty remarkable thing to live through and understand that the people that were in the cloud and had internet kind of continued to just kind of work, and the folks that had to go in and and locate servers and make sure they weren't on the floor on the first ground or in the first floor of a ground floor of a building, and then secondly going through the thing that we all went through with COVID.
Yeah.
And having to all of a sudden have all of the remote access systems not just be backups, but also all of a sudden be the primary way that people were accessing the systems, and the scale and volume that those things had to all of a sudden take on that they weren't architected for in a lot of situations. And so from that standpoint, those two have really shaped the way I think about business continuity. And from that standpoint, it's not just security. While you do have to extend it out to the end user to worry about things like phishing, worry about other things, the business continuity really does truly extend all the way out to the very end point of the endpoint. And you've got to worry about every single user accessing the system maybe in a way that they weren't typically doing that in their day-to-day, and the change management around that is really, really robust and is required. And so I think that may be something that that organizations do underestimate still, that they may not underestimate from a security standpoint. And so I think that may be a little bit of what you're seeing in the numbers too here, Mike.
Yeah, you bet. Tom, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I recall, working on databases and storage area networks in my past life, and having to, copy data, taking many days over expensive connections, or even having to ship drives around, right, to get data into different locations. And so for me, with disaster recovery, it's in AWS with the controls that we have available, right? You can replicate, you can set up replication between different data stores to different regions around the world, right? Or very simply, just in the US, right, between East and West Coast, to make sure your data's in multiple places and then is highly durable in those places. I think that is a really powerful feature that's now just available at the click of a few buttons or a few API calls for customers, versus how it used to be, on costly storage devices and things that you had to procure and put into different data center locations. It was really challenging before, but now the SaaS providers are able to take control of where the data resides, but also how to make sure that it's backed up, that it's available. And then on top of that, the actual systems of the applications themselves, right? You can spread those applications across availability zones and regions, and offer your end customers the ability to access it for wherever they are in the world.
Yeah, you bet. And that's one of the things. So, as mentioned, I'm here in Vegas for Black Hat, but I actually do some teaching. So I teach our cloud security class there. And, and that's one of the things that we go over, right, is our architectures that, can help with both security and resilience. And if you do it right, you can build application stacks that are far more resilient and a lot more secure than you can do in your data center. If you do it wrong, yikes, right? But, that's why Tom and his team are there, is to make sure that you don't do it wrong, that you've got all the frameworks and the likes and the help to make sure that you do it right from that perspective. But again, now I'll also let you in on another little secret, about, kind of this whole thing. And remember, a lot of what we talked about today, especially about a lot of the technologies, are really going to be under the covers for those of you folks that are looking at SaaS systems, looking at F&A specifically, but we want you to be educated from that standpoint. But the other thing to pay attention to are your contracts, right? What are the providers, basically warranting that they're going to do, right? What are your service levels from the standpoint of, what are they going to deliver, and make sure that, that does happen. Do you have protections to ensure that your data, isn't leaked out of their environment? And again, as you're moving into a cloud platform, it is a new world, and there are both, technical controls and protections that we have to put in place, and there are also contractual protections that we have to have as well. So I don't want to forget that, because that's an important aspect of, kind of the governance that's involved in moving your workloads, to the cloud eventually. So any parting thoughts, fellas, before we kind of wrap up? I mean, I think this was a pretty good discussion about, kind of getting a sense of what's involved in, really thinking about how mission critical applications, need to, move to the cloud, and the stuff that we not just, kind of need, right, but that we must expect in terms of being able to ensure we have a secure and a reliable environment.
Yeah, I think the thing I would end with really, is to kind of continue a little bit of the conversation earlier about the fact that these days, in 2023, where we have all of the, the systems and architecture available that you would need to construct an incredibly robust, incredibly resilient infrastructure for any size business. It does cost money. But ultimately, you don't have to have an army of experts anymore. You have to, have the phone number of guys like Tom, to reach out to and say, hey, help me build an incredible infrastructure. And you can get every feature that, an enterprise 5 company, or a Fortune 5 company would have, and have that in front of you and ready. So there's really no excuse, these days, for not having something that that really truly does protect your data and protect your your internal, the company, the crown jewels of your company or your organization.
Yeah, and I'd just to plus one to that, really, Chris, and how hark back to the 31%, I think it was, that have no plans to migrate in this year. And I think it's time to set up what that plan is. You can hear from Sage that there's they have a finance and accounting platform that is ready on the cloud to consume as SaaS, and consuming AWS at the back end for that, to build it out and to be highly resilient and secure. So I don't think there is any good reason not to do it anymore. This is the time to be doing that migration.
All right, listen, Tom, Chris, thank you so much. So before I hand it back to Cody, because I know, at least some of you are probably excited about the $20 or $25 gift cards as well. So before we get there, again, as Cody had mentioned, in your handouts area, within the interface, is the pulse meter that goes into our commentary around each of these different data points that we have discussed today. So gives you some more context, a little bit more depth in terms of, again, what we surveyed the audience for, and make sure that you understand that. And we also have 2 upcoming events. Data Ops Day is next week, so definitely check that out, as well as the Digital CXO Summit, which is coming up in September. And with that, you can register for any of these at techstrongevents.com. And with that, my friend Cody, come back in. Let's give out some gift cards and send everybody on their way.
Happy to. Thank you, Mike and Tom and Chris. Thank you both so much for joining us today as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. So I'd like to remind our audience that our session was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand, or of course, you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card giveaway are Phil R., Irene O., Antonio's S., and Ajay C. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim your gift card. We'll be reaching out to you in the next 48 hours to get you that gift card. If you don't happen to see an email, check your spam folder on the off case that it happens to get filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and Sage for sponsoring our program today. I'd like to give a shout out to Techstrong Research for conducting the polls that went into putting together this pulse meter report, which once again is available in that handout section. And I would also like to thank our audience for sticking around with us and hopefully filling out our post-webinar survey. So if you do stick around, as soon as we close out, you'll be funneled into that survey. There's also a link there in the chat if you'd like to jump to it right now. Either way, we would love to hear your thoughts about today's program or upcoming topic ideas. Shoot them on over and we would love to hear. Again, thanks everyone for joining, and you may now disconnect. Tom, Chris, Mike, thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.